All right, welcome into Hour 2 here, the Jordy Culotta Show, daily driven and powered by Go Chevrolet. Check them out online at GEAUXChevrolet.com. Stick around. Eric Sanchez is in the UDL. Our guy is going to be here. He has mastered the art of going viral, and we will talk to him about some NIL stuff.
Doing it right now.
We will talk to him about some of his past projects, including ending up on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. From one of his stories. So a lot to get to with Eric Sanchez. We'll also talk to Tyler McManus, who is one of the LSU baseball new faces, who is transferring in to play for Jay Johnson. But next we talk to Josh Pate. If you've been paying attention to our platform, which we are now here daily on YouTube, we've gone from the daily radio show to now going full digital, as we are all on social spaces like YouTube and Facebook and our website, JordyCulottaShow.com, talking daily about Louisiana sports and highlighting what's going on down here in our state. Josh Pate is doing that on a grander scale and is knocking it out of the park, man. I'd imagine if you are a college football fan, that you have seen his work. If not, I would advise you to get over and follow him on Twitter instantly. He is at Late Kick Josh, and he's over at 247 Sports. He's working for CBS Sports as well, and he's got an incredible daily YouTube, which is just jam-packed with daily information about college football. Whether you want up-to-date college recruiting, SEC, just overall stories like Texas on its way back with Steve Sarkisian, to stuff like NIL, stuff we'll talk to Eric about coming up here in 15 minutes. Josh does a great job of daily just informing college football fans about what's going on. So it is our pleasure to welcome him into the conversation now here on the Jordy Culotta Show. From the Late Kick with Josh Pate, we welcome in Josh here to the conversation. Good morning, man. Thank you for your time.
Well, first off, Jordy, thank you. Secondly, I just got back from home. I went down there for a week, and none of my family members introduced me fractionally as good as you just did. So, man, I appreciate that.
We will send the address, and I expect a check in the mail, Josh. No problem at all, man. No, it is great to have you. It is great to have you because, what you're doing, I think that you definitely saw a need, and you are providing a service to people around, whether it's the Southeastern Conference or just college football fans, that is just very informative. It's very easy to follow. So from down here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, we appreciate it very much. One of the stories that you touched on last night that I wanted to start off with before we get into the SEC and LSU and what to watch out for this fall is Texas. And one of the stories that we've heard down here in Texas is that they've made a really good impression on Arch Manning and his family from a recruiting standpoint. What have you heard from the Texas trail and what Steve Sarkisian has been able to kick up as far as interest goes in Austin before his first season?
Well, it's layered, and it's a little mixed. So let's start with Arch Manning. What you said about Arch, I believe is true. I think they killed it with his visit he took out there a few weeks ago. But, here's what's also happening. What's also happening is I think that coaching staff is slowly realizing the landscape of recruiting in Texas has really rapidly changed, and this is just something that's happened over the last 5 years in earnest. Last night we talked about this. Over the past 3 years, let's just say 4 years, when Tom Herman landed a number 3 class at Texas in 2018, that kind of set the narrative for him. He was going to have all the talent in the world. There's no excuse to lose. We all remember how that turned out. But what also happened is there were a lot of wheels in motion as that number 3 class got signed that I don't think anyone, including myself, really fully appreciated at the time. You had the tail end of the Stoops era at Oklahoma, Lincoln Riley getting his feet under him. So Oklahoma was not recruiting in Texas like they were about to. You had the tail end of the Sumlin era, Jimbo Fisher coming in. They're just getting their wheels under them. So A&M's not recruiting like they would go on to recruit in state. And although Alabama and Ohio State were already recruiting in Texas, you didn't have Clemson out there. You didn't have Oregon in there. You didn't have all these other national contenders. Well, you fast forward 3 years, and the same thing that's happened in Florida, because the big three there has been down recruiting for so long, is happening in Texas. Contenders outside the state have looked and said, whereas previously it was tough to get talent out of there, now it's open season. So let's go raid that state, and that's kind of what's been happening. So last week, it was on display when Oregon, of all programs, comes from the Pacific Northwest and comes in there and grabs Kelvin Banks, which is one of the top offensive linemen in the country, He's out of Humble, Texas. Not Humble, Humble, Texas. And that caught some people by surprise because Texas was thought to be the leader there. And not only does the kid commit to Oregon, but he says A&M was my number 2. So, yeah, I think there is some traction still to be gained for Steve Sarkisian at Texas, but also you and I both know, I mean, everyone in this room knows, results on the field this fall will quell a lot of that unrest and uneasiness because as soon as guys, Arch Manning I'm including here, as soon as they see something more than just vision, as soon as they see a more proven, tangible product on the field, I don't think it's all that hard to buy into going to Texas. I think the only thing kids are hanging out on is, well, Texas hasn't given me anything to believe in over the last several staffs now. Let me make sure this one's different. If it is, I'm on board.
Josh, one of the things that you point out last night in your Late Kick Live latest edition is the LSU Florida game and just how big it can have as far as implications go on the league, the championship, and into the postseason. A lot of people around here recognize Florida as LSU's top rival right now. I think, the Alabama game gains notoriety, but it's not been a rivalry with the way that Alabama has dominated the series. The rivalry really exists between LSU and Florida right now. How do you see that matchup here in the offseason going into their October tilt?
Yeah, I was looking at that game. I decided to talk about it last night because there are some games on conference schedules every year, the SEC especially, that I call game pluses or gamer pluses. And all I mean by that is I think they just carry a little more significance than simply one game in the standings. Now, rivalry games tend to be like that anyway, but the reason I looked at that Florida-LSU game is if you look at it from either side, let's just go LSU side right here. They're going to be, before they play Florida, they got the game at UCLA, they got the game at Mississippi State, they got a game against Auburn, they go to Kentucky. And the reason I mention those games is because from a pure point spread perspective, LSU will be single-digit favorite or maybe against Kentucky, a low double-digit favorite in those games. So on one hand, you expect them to win all of them. But on the other hand, you would look at them and also call them losable games. If you're just a Texas Tech fan who has no dog in the fight, you would look at that and say, hey, LSU, they could drop that one. Well, here's the point. If LSU is what we think they are maximally capable of, they'll be undefeated when they face Florida on, October 16th. However, if things go sideways again this year, they could have one loss minimum there, and Florida's the exact same way. Florida's got Bama in week 3, so Florida's going to be an underdog at least once before they play LSU. And my point is, you could have a situation where one or both of those programs are in wounded animal mode, back against the wall mode, but you also could have a situation where one or both have vastly exceeded what I think the national expectation is for them. And at that point, I think especially with LSU, if they get quarterback right, if those two coordinator hires end up being home runs, they should beat everybody on their schedule up to that game. And we could be looking at LSU going into that Florida game. Instead of having a lot of trepidation surrounding the name LSU, you could be saying, if LSU beats Florida today, I mean, is that Alabama-LSU game in a couple of weeks going to be for not only the SEC West, but are we talking about maybe multiple teams being capable of making the playoff? I think that's the way that narrative would change mid-season, and it really, really revolves around that game.
Josh, when you look at the SEC East, you mentioned Florida. Georgia this season seems like they have some expectation, especially with the way that they feel around the quarterback spot. When you look at the SEC East, what do you see?
Well, I see Georgia well out in front of the pack, but I don't know, and I didn't realize this because I haven't read the preview magazines yet, but I did not realize there are people not ranking Florida in the top 25. So I'm not going that down on Florida. I think a lot of what is being cast on Florida in terms of preseason expectation this year is just people being rubbed the wrong way by how last year ended, which is understandable. I just don't know how much carryover that always has. But I'm looking at Florida, and I'm thinking to myself, let's say this were an anonymous team, so all you had to look at was a resume, and you knew they had a top 10 to 12 talent roster. They had a couple of top 10 finishes past 4 years. Last year they won their division. And I say all that, and I'm going to say I'm parking them outside the top 25. I don't think if you did the blind resume, they'd be parked outside of anyone's top 25. Yeah. Because it's Florida, and you remember the shoe throw, and you remember Oklahoma meltdown. Well, that's why you rank them out of the top 25, I would guess. But, yeah, I mean, you guys can tell me, can anyone paint me a valid scenario outside of injury at quarterback? Can anyone paint me a valid scenario where Georgia doesn't win this thing? Florida's got to play LSU and Bama from the West. Georgia gets neither one of them. I have no clue how they messed that up.
Good Lord.
What are the odds on the SEC West? I mean, SEC East champion. I got to put that in real quick.
How do you feel about Kentucky, Josh? They're going to pick up another one of LSU starters. They got Kelvin Joseph 2 years ago. Now they get Dare Rosenthal, the left tackle, transferring in after issues down here in Baton Rouge. What's the feeling around Stoops here in another season?
They're very quietly confident, and the reason is, number one, because they know, I mean, they can't be carrying that big a stick around here. They're Kentucky, so they know they have to surprise people. But the second part is they do not know what they're going to be at quarterback. They have a lot of hope invested in Will Levis, who's the transfer, for those unfamiliar, from Penn State. And he was not good enough to start at Penn State. Okay, that doesn't always mean the end of the world. Some guys get second chances and shine. I think famously you saw that in 2019. However, they don't know what they have because he wasn't an early enrollee. I mean, he's just now getting on campus. And so they'll get him for the first time really in fall camp. Mark Stoops did something that is very anti-Mark Stoops. Mark Stoops is normally what you get, and what you see, rather, is what you get. And he, I think, realized they're as good right now as they've been. Just the status of that program, they're on really firm footing. And he realized, if I'm ever going to try anything, this is the year. And so he went out and hired a new offensive coordinator, and they're going to bring in a different approach. I got to have quarterback figured out to do it. But they feel like there's a little more juice that can be squeezed out of that program going in a different direction offensively. Now, if that's the case, dude, their schedule this year, just from a purely opportunistic standpoint, listen to this stretch. You would think Kentucky playing at South Carolina, Florida, LSU, at Georgia, back, that's a death sentence. Well, the thing about it is, it doesn't have to be, because when they play Florida, Florida will be coming off the Tennessee game. When they play LSU, LSU will be coming off the Auburn game. When they play Georgia, Georgia's coming off an Auburn game. So they catch all these teams at the most vulnerable position, and all they have to do is pull one of those upsets to make it a different season for Kentucky. I know some people have them finishing second in the East. The way that happens is if it's Georgia and a train wreck behind them, and then Kentucky just emerges from the smoke, which would not shock me.
Josh, last one. We'll get you out of here, and we much appreciate your time here on this Monday morning. Make sure you are following Josh Pate on Twitter at @LateKickJosh to keep up with everything that's happening with his YouTube channel. He goes live there Sunday and Thursday night at 7 o'clock Central Time. All the news is flowing over at @LateKickJosh on Twitter. We've got Max Johnson as a starter at LSU going into the season. We feel that he secured that spot with his spring, the way that he finished last year, and just the overall feeling around the coaching staff. We also feel that this roster for LSU is championship level, but have some questions around the offensive line. When you see Ed Ogeron's group going into the season, how do you see LSU contending this season?
That's the way I classify it. I think that's it's almost like you guys cover that program. Yeah, no, I think that's very accurate. But with the quarterback situation, to me, it's not just, is it Max or is it Miles? I would love to see, if it's Max Johnson, for argument's sake, I would love to see us get 2.5 weeks into fall camp and all the whispers out of Baton Rouge be, not only is this thing decided, but he's taking it by the throat. And there's been such a galvanizing effect in the locker room, because the locker room was a problem for them last year. I want to see not only a decision made, I want to see a decision made by the players. I want to see a decision to where it doesn't even take a high-level coach to look at it and break it down. It's just that obvious. That's how I hope things shake out, because that's how you get shot out of a cannon going into a season instead of tiptoeing your way into a season.
Josh, love your work, man. Thank you for stopping by with us this morning. Hope we can do it again soon.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.